My return to civilization once more the MAFEKING fund letters from the King and Queen. Let us admit it fairly, as business people should. We have had no end of a lesson. It will do us no end of good. Kipling. On June 27 I left Johannesburg under the escort of Major Bobby White, who had kindly promised to see me safely as far as Cape Town. We travelled in a shabby third-class carriage, the only one on the train, which was merely composed of open trucks. Our first long delay was at Elandsfontein, practically still in the Rand district. There the officer in charge came up with the pleasing intelligence that the train we were to join had broken down, and would certainly be 4 hours late. So we had to get through a very weary wait at this most unattractive little township, whose only interesting features were the distant chimneys and unsightly shafts of the Simmer and Jack and the Rose deep mines, and far away on the horizon, the little white house amid a grove of trees, which had been Lord Roberts's headquarters barely a month ago, and from which he had sent the summons to Johannesburg to surrender. All around, indeed, was the scene of recent fighting, and various polite transport officers tried to while away the tedium of our enforced delay by pointing out various faint ridges, and explaining that there the Gordons had made their splendid charge, or again, that farther back General French had encountered such a stubborn resistance, and so on, ad libitum. In response I gazed with enthusiastic interest, but the flat, hideous country which guards its deeply buried treasure so closely seemed so alike in every direction, and the operations of the victorious army covered so wide an area that it was difficult to make a brain picture of that rapid succession of feats of arms. At the station itself, the Tommies buzzed about like bees, and the officers were having tea or dinner or both combined in the refreshment room. One overheard scraps of conversation, from a subaltern to his superior officer. "A capital bag today, sir. 40 Mausers and 10,000 rounds of ammunition." Then someone else remarked that a railway train from the south passed yesterday, riddled with bullets, and recounted the marvellous escape its occupants had had, which was not encouraging in view of our intended journey over the same route. A young man in uniform presently entered with a limp, and in answer to inquiries, said his wounded leg was doing famously, adding that the bullet had taken exactly the same course as the one did not 6 weeks ago only, then it had affected the other knee. So I knew how to treat it, and I am off to the Yeomanry Hospital if they will have me. I only left there a fortnight ago, and by Jove, it was like leaving paradise. Another arrival came along saying the Boers had received a proper punishing for their last depredations on the railway, when De Wet had brought off his crowning coup by destroying the mail bags. But this gentleman had hardly finished his tale when a decided stir was observable, and we heard a wire was to hand saying the same De Wet was again on the move, and that a strong force of men and guns were to leave for the scene of action by our train tonight. At this juncture, seeing there was no prospect of any immediate departure, I installed myself comfortably with a book in the waiting room, and was so absorbed that I did not even notice the arrival of a train from Heidelberg, till the door opened and my nephew, the Duke of Marlborough, looked in, and we exchanged a surprised greeting, being totally unaware of each other's whereabouts. Except for meeting Winston in Pretoria, I had not seen the face of one of my relations for more than a year, but so many surprising things happen in wartime that we did not evince any great astonishment at this strange and unexpected meeting. In answer to my inquiries as to what brought him there, he told me he was returning to Pretoria with his temporarily incapacitated chief, General Ian Hamilton, who was suffering from a broken collarbone, incurred by a fall from his horse. Expecting to find the general in a smart ambulance carriage, it was somewhat of a shock to be guided to a very dilapidated old cattle truck, with open sides and a floor covered with hay. I peeped in, and extended on a rough couch in the farther corner, I perceived the successful general, whose name was in everybody's mouth. In spite of his unlucky accident, he was full of life and spirits, and we had quite a long conversation. I have since often told him how interesting was his appearance, and he in reply has assured me how much he was impressed by a blue bird's-eye cotton dress I was wearing, the like of which he had not seen since he left England, many months before. His train soon rumbled on, and then we had a snug little dinner in the ladies' waiting room that the station commandant, a gallant and hospitable major, had made gay with trophies, photographs, and coloured pictures out of various journals. From a deep recess under his bed, he produced an excellent bottle of claret, and the rest of the dinner was supplied from the restaurant. The short African winter's day had faded into a blue and luminous night, resplendent with stars, and still our belated train tarried. However, the situation was improved, for later advices stated that the Boers had cleared off from the vicinity of the railway line, and that we should surely leave before midnight. All these rumours certainly added to the excitement of a railway journey, and it occurred to me how tame in comparison would be the ordinary departure of the Flying Scotsman, or any other of the same tribe that nightly leave the great London termini. At length, with many a puff and agonised groan from the poor little undersized engine, we departed into the dim, mysterious night, which hourly became more chill, and which promised a sharp frost before morning. As we crawled out of the station, our kind military friends saluted and wished us, a little ironically, a pleasant journey. When I was about to seek repose, Major White looked in and said, "Sleep with your head away from the window in case of a stray shot," and then I turned down the light and was soon in the land of dreams. The much-dreaded night passed quite quietly, and in the morning the carriage windows were thickly coated with several degrees of frost. The engines of the Netherlands Railway, always small and weak, were at that time so dirty from neglect and overpressure during the war that their pace was but a slow crawl, and uphill they almost died away to nothing. However, fortunately, going south meant going downhill, and we made good progress over the flat, uninteresting country, which, in view of recent events, proved worthy of careful attention. Already melancholy landmarks of the march of the great army lay on each side of the line, in the shape of carcasses of horses, mules, and oxen. Wolvehoek was the first stop. Here blue-nosed soldiers descended from the railway carriages in varied and weird costumes, making a rush with their billies 40 for hot water, wherewith to cook their morning coffee, cheerily laughing and cracking their jokes, while shivering natives in blankets and tattered overcoats waited hungrily about for a job or scraps of food. After leaving Wolvehoek, we entered on Commandant de Wet's hunting ground, and the scene of his recent exploits. There, at almost every culvert, at every ganger's house, were pickets of soldiers, all gathered round a crackling fire at that chill morning hour. And at every one of these posts, freshly constructed works of sandbags and deep trenches were in evidence to denote that their sentry work was no play, but grim earnest. We next crossed the Renoster Spruit, and passed the then famous Renoster position, so formidable even to the unskilled eye, and where my military friends told me the Boers would have given much trouble, had it not been for the two outspread wings of the Commander-in-Chief's army. A little farther on, the deviation line and the railway bridge were pointed out as one of the many triumphs of engineering skill to be seen and marvelled at on that recently restored line. The achievements of these lion-hearted engineers could not fail to impress themselves even on a civilian. Many amongst them were volunteers, who had previously occupied brilliant positions in the great mining community in Johannesburg, and whose brains were the pride of a circle where intellectual achievements and persevering resource commanded at once the greatest respect and the highest remuneration. Some of these latter had family ties besides their considerable positions, but they gladly hastened to place their valuable services at the disposal of their Queen, and, in conjunction with the regular Royal Engineers, were destined to find glory, and in many cases death, at their perilous work. The task of the engineers is probably scarcely realised by people who have not seen actual warfare. We do not read so frequently of their doings as of those of their gallant colleagues on foot or on horse, but soldiers know that neither the genius of the generals nor the intrepidity of the men could avail without them. And as the scouts are called the eyes, so might the engineers, both regular and volunteer, be termed the hands and feet of an advancing force. The host sweeps on, and the workers are left with pickaxe and shovel, rifles close at hand, to work at their laborious task loyally and patiently, while deeds of courage and daring are being done and applauded not many miles away from them. This particular Renoster Bridge was destroyed and rebuilt no less than 3 times up to the date of which I write, and the third time was only 10 days previously, when Christian de Wet had also worked havoc among the mail bags, the only cruel thing attributed to that commander, respected both by friends and foes. The sad, dumb testimony of this lamented misfortune was to be seen in the shape of thousands of mutilated envelopes and torn letters, which covered the rails and the ground beyond letters, which would have brought joy to many a lonely heart at the front. It was really heartbreaking to behold this melancholy remnant of 1,500 mail bags, and a little farther on, to see 3 skeleton trucks charred by fire, which told how the warm clothing destined for the troops perished when De Wet and his burghers had taken all they needed. Many yarns were related to me about the chivalry of this farmer general, especially respecting the mail bags, and how he said that his burghers should not make fun of the English officers' letters, and therefore that he burnt them with his own hands. Another anecdote was remarkable, namely, that of an officer searching sadly among the heap of debris for some eagerly expected letter, and who came across an uninjured envelope directed to himself, containing his bank book from Messrs. Cox and Sons, absolutely intact and untouched. It can only be conjectured whether he would as soon have known it in ashes. On arriving in the vicinity of Kronstadt, the most risky part of the journey was over, and then a wonderfully novel scene unfolded itself as we crawled over a rise from the desolate, barren country we had been traversing, and a tented city lay in front of us. Anyway, such was its appearance at a first glance, for white tents stretched far away east and west, and appeared to swamp into insignificance the unpretentious houses, and even a fairly imposing church spire which lay in the background. I had never seen anything like this vast army depot, and examined everything with the greatest attention and interest. Huge mountains of forage covered by tarpaulin sheets were the first things to catch my eye. Then piles upon piles of wooden cases were pointed out as rations, that mysterious term which implies so much and may mean so little. Again, there was a hillock of wicker-covered bottles with handles which puzzled me, and which were explained as cordials of some kind. Powerful traction engines, at rest and in motion, next came into sight, and weird objects that looked like lifeboats mounted on trucks, but which proved to be pontoon strange articles to perceive at a railway station. Then we passed a vast concourse of Red Cross tents of every description, proclaiming a hospital. As far as outward appearances went, it looked most beautifully arranged in symmetrically laid-out streets, while many of the marquees had their sides thrown back and showed the patients.